Good day and welcome to Big Bad Tech. I'm your instructor Jim Pytel, and today's topic of discussion is capacity factor. Our objective today is to introduce a common performance measurement known as capacity factor. We'll learn to calculate capacity factor for a generation facility and compare capacity factors for different types of generation facilities. The prerequisites for this lecture include those skills you've learned in the energy and power lecture. If you haven't tackled this material or perhaps only dimly recall these skills, please take the time to visit this lecture before continuing. I'll be right here waiting till you get back. Let's start this lecture on capacity factor with a brief discussion about how awesome I am. When I say that I'm awesome, I mean I'm totally awesome. I do awesome things all the time and I do them awesomely. One of my most awesome hobbies is whitewater kayaking. I have run rapids in the remote jungles of South America and Alaskan wilds and all points in between that would make less awesome folks drop dead of fear just by listening to their roar. What's awesome is that I ran these fearsome rapids smoothly, confidently, and with style, i.e. awesomely. My dirty little secret, though, is that there have been periods in my whitewater kayaking past that have not gone so awesomely. I have screwed up, swam, and screamed for help many times. I've run giant waterfalls backwards, sideways, and upside down, and I've had to tuck my tail between my legs and hike out of runs that were far nastier than I. In summary, I have gotten my ass beat plenty of times. The point is, not everybody can be awesome all the time. I'd like to think my history of awesomeness outweighs my brief but intense periods of non-awesomeness, and when taken together, this places me squarely on the awesome half of the dividing line. This holistic measurement of a performance taken over time is known as capacity factor. On a really good day, of course things are going well, and as they say in Legoland, everything is awesome. On a bad day, not so much. If you were to measure performance on as a single snapshot on one of those days, you'd get an artificially inflated or deflated sense of how things are truly going. Capacity factor measurements aren't single instantaneous snapshots, but they're measured over time, typically on an annual basis. Consider a 2.3 megawatt wind turbine. One of the most common questions people ask me about wind turbines, besides why are they so big, why are they so tall, and why are they painted white, is how much energy do they produce? My answer is it depends. It depends on the wind. It depends on where you put them. It depends on how well maintained they are. It depends on a lot of things. In short, it depends upon the capacity factor of this wind turbine. I don't know why they paint them white. Maybe there's a sale on white. Consider the best case, i.e. the most awesome scenario imaginable. This 2.3 megawatt turbine is installed in a perfect site that is always at this turbine's rated wind speed. Therefore, it's continually outputting 2.3 megawatts of power. This totally awesome turbine never needs maintenance or repair. If a 2.3 megawatt turbine ran for 24 hours a day, how much energy would it produce? Remember, energy is power times time. A 2.3 megawatt turbine operating for 24 hours would produce 55.2 megawatt hours of energy. The unit megawatt hour is kind of nonsense to me because the common unit of energy used by electrical utilities is the kilowatt hour, so you can do a conversion to kilowatt hours if you want to. Where 1 megawatt hour is equivalent to 1,000 kilowatt hours, units of megawatt hours cancel out, this turbine yields 55,200 kilowatt hours in a 24-hour period. Remember, this energy production is just for a single totally awesome day. What if that single totally awesome day stretched into an unbroken string of 365 totally awesome days? A totally awesome year, if you will. 365 times 55,200 yields 20,148,000 kilowatt hours, which is also 20,148 megawatt hours, or 20.148 gigawatt hours. This is a lot of energy. Consider the quantity of money that could be earned by this totally awesome turbine if it was operating for a full year at peak capacity. If you got credited 12 cents per kilowatt hour, 20,148,000 kilowatt hours would yield you $2,417,760 for that totally awesome year. Like I said, totally awesome. Problem is, not everything is awesome. Sometimes the wind doesn't blow strong enough, so the turbine runs at a reduced capacity. Sometimes the wind doesn't blow at all and your output is zero. Sometimes the turbine needs to be serviced or repaired. Sometimes you have to wait on a part for a day or so. Sometimes your crew messes something up on what should be a quick service call and it takes longer to fix than you expect. Sometimes everything is totally functional and extremely windy, but there's a grid problem and you just can't connect the turbine to the grid. Point is, there are periods of reduced or zero production. In short, these periods of non-awesomeness reduce the amount of what this turbine could have produced down to what it did produce. This is the capacity factor. It is a ratio typically expressed as a percentage of how much energy something did produce compared to how much energy it could have produced. If what you could produce represents the maximum possible output, it stands to conjecture that what one did produce could never exceed this maximum value. Therefore, one will never have a capacity factor of greater than 100%. If in the course of your calculations you find a capacity factor of greater than 100%, or if you ever produce more energy than you could have produced energy, you're doing it wrong, and you need to perform a tactical retreat and reassess your data. Let's say we look up the annual energy output for this particular turbine on a wind farm's SCADA system. SCADA, by the way, is the Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Program that continually monitors and controls each turbine in a wind farm. It's a computer program that records and displays performance data. More on this in later lectures, but for right now, just think of it as a spreadsheet with a cell that says annual energy production. Let's say this turbine actually did produce 6,648,840 kilowatt hours over the course of a year. The capacity factor of this turbine, therefore, is the ratio of this number, what it did produce, over what it could have produced, 20,148,000 kilowatt hours. If you run the numbers, 6,648,840 divided by 20,148,000, you'll find a capacity factor of 33% for this wind turbine. This 33% capacity factor is pretty respectable. If you're credited 12 cents per kilowatt hour, this turbine still earned you just shy of $800,000 over the course of that year. Given a properly maintained turbine has an operational lifespan of 20 to 25 years, this is a great investment considering the fuel is free. Yes, you have to buy an expensive turbine and maintain it, just like you would a coal-fired power plant, but the fuel is free. That's the point of renewable energy. You'll find capacity factors, even for coal-fired power plants and hydroelectric dams, things that you think would ordinarily always run at peak capacity with little fluctuations, to be actually quite low. 33% is a great capacity factor for a wind turbine you just stick in the middle of a field and wait for the wind to blow. What this figure represents is the annual average of how often this turbine runs at peak capacity, hence the name capacity factor, meaning on average, this turbine could run at peak capacity for 1/3 of a day, or 8 hours every day, or it could run at 1/3 of its peak power production, or 2.3 megawatts divided by 3, for 24 hours a day for a full year, or any other combination of operating periods and outputs that yields 6,648,840 kilowatt hours of annual energy output. The details don't matter. Capacity factor is a quick and dirty overview of how this turbine performs annually. There could be weeks of no wind, followed by weeks of non-stop nuking conditions, as long as over the course of the year, on average, this turbine operated at peak capacity 33% of the time. Compare this to a similar turbine that has a 20% capacity factor, and it's easy to spot problems in your wind farm. Consider widely variant capacity factors for identical wind turbines located in the same wind farm in the same row. You expect them to have similar capacity factors. The underperforming turbines could have a history of poor maintenance or some fundamental flaw. Let's say you put the blades on backwards, or you installed it upside down, or it's just plain haunted by ghosts that requires immediate attention. Consider the Bonneville Dam. This is the first hydroelectric generation facility in the Columbia River power system, and the first thing spawning salmon bump their heads into and say, "Damn!" on their upstream journey. It's got 20 turbines of varying sizes. All 20 are running at full capacity. This dam is cranking out 1,189 megawatts of power. However, Bonneville Dam on average only produces 4,466 gigawatt hours of energy. What is this dam's capacity factor? Look at our formula for capacity factor. We've got the amount of energy it did produce, 4,466 gigawatt hours. All we need to do is figure out how much it could have produced. Word of warning up front, choose a common unit. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's the same. Energy is power times time. A 1,189 megawatt station operating for 24 hours a day would produce 28,536 megawatt hours. If it did this for 365 days or a whole year, it would produce 10,415,640 megawatt hours. Again, stay organized. Remember which units you're punching into your calculator. The energy it could have produced is in units of megawatt hours, so all I'm going to do is convert what it did produce also into megawatt hours. If 1 gigawatt hour is 1,000 megawatt hours, Bonneville Dam did produce 4,466,000 megawatt hours. Now we've got both figures in like units. What we did produce and what we could have produced. Flip your selector switch to rock and roll and engage your target. Seriously, the hardest part of this whole capacity factor game is the energy and power calculations and just getting everything in the terms of the same units. The rest is just a hip shot at a 50-meter target painted bright orange. We find a capacity factor figure of roughly 42.9%. Like I said before, not as high as you'd expect for a 197-foot high, 2,690-foot long, and 132-foot wide chunk of concrete plugging up the fourth largest river in the United States. The tremendous advantage of hydropower over wind power, though, is that you need not predict availability. It's there. The 46.8-mile-long Bonneville Reservoir backed up behind the dam says so. Consider the Three Gorges hydroelectric dam in China. This is a true monster of monstrous proportions. It has 34 turbines that altogether have a peak capacity of 22.5 gigawatts and has a capacity factor of 45%. How much energy did it produce over the course of a single year? Before you rush off, though, pause for a moment. You might be shocked to see the peak capacity of the Three Gorges Dam is only 22.5 gigawatts in comparison to Bonneville Dam's 1,189 megawatts. Hold on now. Don't rush into a painfully obvious pit trap. If you do so, I guarantee you will die a slow and horrible death. Look at the units. 22.5 gigawatts is actually 22,500 megawatts. Do you understand how big the Three Gorges hydroelectric dam is now? It's that big. It's the world's largest power generation station. Pause the lecture and see if you can rearrange our capacity factor calculation to find the amount of energy produced by the Three Gorges Dam. A rearrangement finds that what it did produce is equal to capacity factor times what it could have produced. Well, capacity factor is expressed strictly as a ratio. I don't like the percentages because it kind of gets messy. I know 45% is 0.45. When you take what it could have produced times the capacity factor, it kind of makes sense. The capacity factor is reducing what it could have produced, the theoretical maximum, down to what it did produce. Now all I've got to do is find out what it could have produced. Energy is power times time. 22.5 gigawatts generated for 24 hours yields 540 gigawatt hours. If it did this every day for 365 days, the Three Gorges Dam could produce 197,100 gigawatt hours, or using the most appropriate engineering prefix, 197.1 terawatt hours. This is the amount of energy it could produce, and all we do is multiply it by our capacity factor, expressed as a ratio as 0.45. 197 times 0.45 is 88.7 terawatt hours. Now I'm going to take 2 nanoseconds of my time and check my work using this thing called the internet. Perhaps you've heard of it. Yep, the annual energy average output of Three Gorges Dam is 88.7 terawatt hours. This figure is sure to change as the Three Gorges wakes up, but at the time of the recording of this lecture, we're spot on. Before we wrap this lecture up, let's have a largely non-numerical chat about capacity factor. Beyond tedious calculations of kilowatt hours and dollars, you need to have an appreciation of what capacity factor is meant to represent. Capacity factor represents the percentage of time a generating facility is running at peak capacity. What if environmental conditions are ripe for generation, i.e. a wind turbine in the midst of a windy streak, or a solar array at midday, but you choose to perform maintenance on the equipment at this time? Wrong choice. You just killed your capacity factor because conditions were ripe for peak generation, but you took the equipment out of service. Don't do this. This is a bad management practice. You need to anticipate peaks and lulls in production and plan and schedule maintenance accordingly. The management of renewable resources is a more complicated game than black resources. I never said it wasn't. This is the price you pay for free fuel. In regards to wind farms, sometimes regions experience seasonal maximums and lulls. The Columbia River Gorge, my backyard, is known for a nuking summer maximum wind and a somewhat smaller peak in winter. The seasons between these maximums are the times you need to perform involved maintenance, such as intensive annual services and upgrades to your wind farm. Come summer, all wind turbines need to be fully operational, and you need to make hay when the sun shines. Speaking of sunshine, performing maintenance on a solar array in the middle of the day is kinda dumb. Even if your array has a problem and is running at half capacity, just let it run till the sun sets. Not only is working in the evening less hot, it's also less dangerous. When the array isn't being exposed to radiant energy, it's not energized. This does not mean you don't have to perform lockout-tagout procedures, but it does mean that you've got an additional level of safety when you're working on something that isn't running in the first place. Management practices and the intelligent scheduling of maintenance priorities often has a huge influence on capacity factor. If you were capable of somehow scheduling maintenance or repair responsibilities so that they coincided with periods of limited demand, i.e. when you wouldn't be running the generation facility anyways, think of the large impact even a 1% increase in capacity factor would yield. Consider our earlier example of a 2.3 megawatt wind turbine with a 33% capacity factor. We found this wind turbine did generate 6,648,840 kilowatt hours, even though it could have generated 20,148,000 kilowatt hours. What if just by good management practices, you could raise the capacity factor to 34%? In this case, the turbine could generate 20,148,000 times 0.34, or 6,850,320 kilowatt hours. If again you were being credited 12 cents per kilowatt hour, this same turbine, running at an increased 34% capacity factor, would yield you $822,038.40. This is an additional monetary production of $24,177.60 for a single turbine. This is more than enough to fund a handsome bonus for the site supervisor, i.e. you, that is credited for this capacity factor increase. Consider large generation facilities like the Three Gorges Dam. Even a 0.1% increase in capacity factor of this 22.5 gigawatt monster would make Chairman Mao's embalmed corpse smile. Last but not least, let's compare efficiency and capacity factor and how they relate to the production of energy, which is power times time. Efficiency and capacity factor are both performance measurements, but they are totally different. An increase in capacity factor means a 2.3 megawatt turbine is available to generate 2.3 megawatts more often. Capacity factor affects time. An increase in efficiency means that same turbine is extracting more power from an existing column of moving air and is no longer a 2.3 megawatt turbine, it's now a 2.4 megawatt turbine. Efficiency affects power output. In both cases, an increase in capacity factor or efficiency yields more energy extracted over time. It's just that they do it in two totally different methods. Again, what is energy? Energy is power times time. An efficiency upgrade increases the power. A capacity factor upgrade increases the time. That's the game we're playing. Increase energy output by any means necessary. Two means you have to do it are power and time. Alright, I don't want to spend too much time on capacity factor because paired with your skills in energy and power, capacity factor measurements should be a pretty simple calculation. Remember, not every day is awesome, but on average, you should try to make it so. In conclusion, this lecture presented capacity factor calculations, where capacity factor is a performance measurement of how much energy was generated versus how much could have been generated. You should be able to pick up this concept and run with it. Remember to review this material as often as you need to really drive it home. Imagine how well lab will go if you know what you're doing. Thank you very much for your attention and interest, and we'll see you again during the next lecture of our series. Remember to tell your Lazy Lab partner about this resource and be sure to check out the Big Bad Tech playlist for additional resources and updates.